Hi, Mike Amato here. When I first started my channel, I made the conscious decision that I would share with you personal thoughts on my career, personal thoughts on my personal life, certainly thoughts on things that I certainly think of, philosophies and aspects of me that will create a connection with you that hopefully delivers messages in a more meaningful and connected and certainly relevant way. At least that's my hope, and I hope it works out that way for you. So today I want to talk about something that in many ways is a little bit hard for me to talk about because it does involve something that's happening in the real world today. And quite frankly, I feel a little bit odd if I didn't talk about it because, how can we talk about fulfillment and improving our life journey, career success, even relationship success, without acknowledging that this last weekend was a pretty interesting time in our history. And we need to stop and kind of think about it and hopefully learn something from it. So what I'm talking about is of course the Trump administration ban or executive order to ban travel to citizens and former citizens of 7 different nations. And I think there's 2 aspects of this I'd like to discuss. One of them a little bit more briefly, which is really analyzing the merits of this. And that certainly is a great discussion. And I've got friends that think we should do this. I have friends that think we should not do it. And I think that a good, calm discussion about the merits of the executive order is certainly well placed. My point of view, though, is a little bit differently in terms of rather than judge the merits. When I look at this, what I want to know is, and by the way, I would apply this if I was a leader, a parent, a coach. I'd apply this one sort of thought process which says, what problem are we solving? In this case, I think I know the problem that this is intended to solve. By the way, I'm against terrorism. I want to say that right now, and so I don't like it, and I think it's good that we do things to prevent terrorism. So no issue there. But I think about this in terms of does it solve the problem that it's supposed to solve? So what problem is it supposed to solve? And secondly, does it do it? And in my opinion, I think this kind of falls short in terms of delivering on the second, in terms of solving it. I think that this was really something that kind of feeds into the second part that I'd like to spend more time talking about, which really is the way it was enacted. So when we talk about banning travel for certain nations in order to make the nation safer, I think the heavy-handed way with which this was enacted really didn't take into account individuals' lives. These are people. These are not nations, or these are not everybody's not members of terrorist organizations, and yet it's a situation where people have planned their lives on trying to come to America. Maybe they're already in America and they work here, and they need to travel out of the country to do their job. Some of the examples that I've heard are people that even work for the U.S. government, the military, and are not able to travel back and forth. So the way this was enacted certainly feels heavy-handed to me in terms of not dealing with the person, the people that are affected by it always. But then secondly, the whole notion that when you see what our country was founded on, we definitely want to keep it safe, but we also we have to give people hope, especially people who are trying to immigrate legally. So one of the whole notions of this is that there's people that are following the process. There's people that lives are affected by this executive order, and their lives are just totally on hold, even if they spent 2 or 3 or 5 years trying to enter the country legally. And I want to stress that. I'm not talking about illegal immigration here. I'm talking about legally entering the United States. So what that leads to and why that's relevant, besides me saying that it's heavy-handed, the point I'm getting to is that it's an example of a type of leadership. And in fact, when you analyze this and say, well, what happened is, I think what happened is we have a leader right now who thinks making a decision is good leadership. And when you think about that, it's not making decisions, not make a good leader. Any leader is granted authority. And by the way, this is for managers as well, and by the way, parents as well. You're granted an authority to carry out your duties. So having the ability to make a decision is really just enacting the authority that's been granted to you to carry out your duties. So that doesn't make a great leader. What makes a great leader is to say, why don't we look at the authority I've been granted? And what I do is I use that with responsibility. And that means I'm responsible for managing the various stakeholders, for understanding the consequences of what's going to happen. I want to ensure I understand intended and non-intended consequences of the action I'm getting ready to take. It's not enough to have the authority, but we need to execute the authority with responsibility and with a mindful purpose of understanding and having a good and healthy and open debate about what can happen, what can be affected, and how we should do this. because what happens next is it creates accountability. And a good leader understands that they're accountable. In this situation, I think we have a decision, but clearly it was executed without really any responsibility. I mean, the various agencies and not having guidance in how to treat travelers is just one of many examples. But there's people whose lives are totally on hold right now because of the sort of a blunt approach to handling this policy change. But I'll tell you what is not avoidable. You can avoid doing something responsible in a responsible fashion, but what's not avoidable is being held accountable. And I think when we look at this situation, I hope something good comes of it. I hope some a rational approach to protecting the country can be morphed out of this. But the accountability that the leader assumes when they assume their authority is something that they cannot avoid. And I fear that this might be a tipping point in terms of aligning people to say, how do we hold this administration accountable for executing policies like this, and maybe more to come? We just don't know. And they make policies that affect me and you that don't affect us today. We just don't know. And I'll tell you what, that's a little bit scary. So again, I'm sorry, this maybe feels a little bit political, but I'm thinking about this in terms of, again, authority, responsibility, and accountability. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch this develop and see what happens. Now, how do I land this, and where do we take it from this point on? Is that I posted on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, sort of a conversation just like this, which I don't really like to do very often. And the reason I don't like to do it is because we've sort of devolved into a society right now where we yell at each other. And I don't believe we all fit that profile, but certainly the loud left and the loud right yell at each other. I mean, we use labels and hurtful names to describe the other parties. And that's just, in my mind, just so wrong. It's actually led to divide in this country. Ironically, this executive order is actually doing more to align the interests of our nation than anything else that's happened before it. We're actually starting to put aside political differences to say, wow, we need to think about this in terms of what our country stands for, what our country's values are, and how do we think about this and the way this was executed. So it's unifying people who have actually been yelling at each other for years and years now. But even more than that, what I think my invitation for you, and my invitation, I'm certainly going to take myself up on this, but look, my focus now is to say, what do I do to contribute to that divisiveness? And I'm sure I do things to contribute to it. But the reality is when you analyze it, we have a red, that would be blue, and a red. And when we look at the blue and the red sides and shouting at each other, I think most people are actually purple. And my message today is that I think we need more purple. Purples don't yell at each other. Purples have a point of view that may differ for somebody else, but we use the system the framework that's been built. Our country was built on, for heaven's sakes, balancing three branches of government and using all three branches of government to enact policies that reflect the will of the people. Not everybody, and not everybody's always going to agree, but we need to bring things down a notch in terms of the emotional reactions back and forth, stop personal attacks, and remember that we're mostly, I'll tell you what, if you use a standard bell curve, then we are at least 70% purples, and we're somewhere probably along, depending on the issue, along the line towards left to right. But my point here is that, to finish up, is to say, can we have a little bit more purple in the world? And it is a leadership thing. And if the leader can't do it, how do we lead and how do we make that happen? And I hope that this message makes sense. I'm sorry again for the political nature of it, but I just feel compelled to speak out and say, please, can we get a little more purple? Can we talk from a framework of what we think is best for each other and what we personally believe? But what if it was through a lens of love and knowing that we're not the enemy? The left and right are not the enemy. The enemy are people who are actually setting out to hurt this nation, intentionally or not intentionally. And with that, I'll sign off and I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, everybody.